On the evening of November 9, 1989, a man walked into a press conference in East Berlin and accidentally changed the course of history. Within hours, thousands of people were standing at the Berlin Wall, border guards were overwhelmed, and one of the most famous barriers in the world began to fall. The Cold War, which had divided Europe for decades, began to come to an end not with a war or a treaty, but with confusion, miscommunication, and a single sentence that was never supposed to be delivered the way it was. To understand how something like this could happen, you have to go back to the end of World War II in 1945. Germany had been defeated and was divided into 4 occupation zones controlled by the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and the Soviet Union. The capital city of Berlin, even though it was located deep inside the Soviet-controlled zone, was also divided into 4 sectors. Very quickly, tensions began to grow between the Soviet Union and the Western Allies. These tensions eventually became known as the Cold War, a long period of political and military rivalry between the Communist Soviet Union and the capitalist United States and its allies. By 1949, Germany had been split into 2 separate countries. West Germany, officially called the Federal Republic of Germany, was aligned with the United States and Western Europe. East Germany, officially called the German Democratic Republic, was controlled by the Soviet Union and had a communist government. West Berlin became a small democratic island surrounded by communist East Germany. Life in West Germany and West Berlin was very different from life in East Germany. West Germany's economy grew quickly, and people generally had more freedom, higher wages, and better living conditions. East Germany, on the other hand, had a struggling economy, limited freedoms, and strict government control. As a result, millions of East Germans began leaving East Germany and fleeing to West Germany, often by traveling through Berlin, where crossing between sectors was still possible in the early years. By 1961, the East German government had lost so many people that it decided to take drastic action. In August 1961, East Germany began building a wall that surrounded West Berlin, cutting it off from East Berlin and the rest of East Germany. The Berlin Wall quickly became one of the most famous symbols of the Cold War. It was heavily guarded, lined with barbed wire, watchtowers, guards, and what became known as the death strip, an open area where anyone attempting to escape could be shot. Over the years, many people tried to escape over or under the wall, and dozens were killed trying. For nearly 30 years, the Berlin Wall stood as a physical and symbolic barrier between 2 different worlds. Families were separated. Friends were separated. People who lived just streets away from each other could not visit. The wall became a powerful symbol of division between East and West, communism and capitalism, and the Soviet Union and the United States. By the late 1980s, however, things were starting to change. The Soviet Union was weakening economically and politically. In 1985, a new leader named Mikhail Gorbachev came to power in the Soviet Union. Gorbachev introduced new policies called glasnost, meaning openness, and perestroika, meaning restructuring. These policies were meant to reform the Soviet system and make it more open and more efficient. But these reforms also had unintended consequences. They encouraged more openness and more public discussion, and people in Eastern Europe began demanding more freedom. In East Germany, protests began growing in 1989. Thousands of people began demonstrating, demanding the right to travel freely and demanding political reforms. Many East Germans began fleeing the country by traveling to other Eastern European countries like Hungary and Czechoslovakia and then making their way to West Germany. The East German government was under enormous pressure, and it was clear that something had to change. On November 9, 1989, the East German government decided to announce new travel regulations that would allow East Germans to apply for permission to travel to West Germany. The plan was for these new rules to go into effect the next day, and there would still be a process for applying and getting approval. It was not supposed to open the border immediately. That evening, a government official named Günter Schabowski held a press conference to announce the new travel rules. Schabowski had not been fully briefed on all the details and timing of the new policy. During the press conference, a reporter asked him when the new travel rules would take effect. Schabowski looked through his notes and then responded with a sentence that would become famous. He said that the new rules would take effect immediately, without delay. The press conference was broadcast on television, and people across East Germany heard this announcement. If the border was open immediately, that meant people could cross into West Berlin right away. Within hours, thousands of East Germans began gathering at border crossings along the Berlin Wall, demanding to be allowed through. The border guards had not been given any clear instructions. They were not told that the border was officially open, and they were not told to use force to stop people. They were facing massive crowds of civilians who believed they now had permission to cross. The guards tried calling their superiors for instructions, but the situation was chaotic, and no clear orders came. At one of the main crossings, Bornholmer Strasse, the crowd kept growing larger and larger. The guards realized they could not control the situation forever. Finally, late that night, the officer in charge made a decision. He ordered the gates to be opened and allowed people to cross into West Berlin. When the gates opened, thousands of people poured through the checkpoint. People were cheering, crying, hugging strangers, and climbing on top of the Berlin Wall. West Berliners came out to greet East Berliners, and the atmosphere turned into a massive celebration. Within hours, people began using hammers and tools to chip away at the wall. The Berlin Wall, which had stood for 28 years, had effectively fallen in a single night. Over the next several months, the wall was officially dismantled, and less than a year later, in October 1990, Germany was officially reunified as one country again. The fall of the Berlin Wall became one of the most important moments of the 20th century and marked the beginning of the end of the Cold War. What makes the story so fascinating is that such a massive historical event was triggered not by a battle or a formal agreement, but by a miscommunication during a press conference. Gunter Schabowski did not intend to announce that the border was opening immediately, but his wording caused a chain reaction that the East German government could no longer control. The story is a powerful reminder that history is not always shaped by carefully planned decisions. Sometimes history changes because of mistakes, misunderstandings, and moments where no one is entirely sure what is supposed to happen next. For nearly 3 decades, the Berlin Wall had been one of the most heavily guarded borders in the world. And then, in a single night, it stopped functioning because thousands of ordinary people showed up and the guards did not know what to do. It was not a war that brought the wall down. It was pressure, protests, political change, and one accidental announcement that pushed the system past the point where it could hold together any longer. Today, pieces of the Berlin Wall still exist as memorials and museum exhibits, reminders of a time when a city and a country were divided by ideology and politics. The fall of the Berlin Wall is often remembered as a moment of celebration and unity, but it is also a story about how fragile political systems can be when they begin to lose control. One man walked into a press conference, read from a sheet of paper, and answered a question. He did not know that the sentence he was about to say would help trigger the fall of the Berlin Wall. But history does not always move slowly. Sometimes it moves all at once, and sometimes it turns on moments so small that they almost seem like accidents.